So you finally got your new sweet guitar and you've got all the gear to go with it, and then you crack it out and you play it, and there's nothing worse than when it sounds like this. Okay, now if you can't quite tell what's wrong with that guitar, it's completely out of tune, okay? Now admittedly, it might take a while for you to get used to, okay, what does a guitar sound like when it's in tune? But usually if some things don't sound quite right, that's probably the most likely explanation, okay? So how do you tune a guitar? Well, I'm going to show you a couple of methods in a second, but first let me explain how often should you tune your guitar. There's a lot of factors that come into play. So for instance, just when time passes, the guitar will go out of tune. So unlike a lot of other instruments, like say a piano, might stay in tune for weeks, months, probably not years, but it can still sound pretty good after a while. But you know, after a few days, depending on the kinds of conditions as well, which I'll say in a second, a guitar can very easily go out of tune. So even if you haven't touched it, you need to watch out. Your guitar will probably have gone out of tune naturally. Secondly, how much you play. So if you play a lot, the more you play, the more out of tune your guitar will go. And the reason why is that when you strike the strings, you're pushing on them and you're pulling them so that they sort of unwind, as it were. So usually a guitar will go lower in pitch. That's how it will go out of tune. Sometimes they go higher, but I'll explain why in a second, and that's not as common. Thirdly, following on from that, the harder you play the strings, the heavier your playing style is, the more your guitar will go out of tune. And so watch out. If you're finger picking, you probably won't notice it that much because you don't pluck them that hard. But if you're playing with a pick and you're going really heavy at it, it might go out of tune within 15 to 20 minutes of actually playing it. It's definitely common. I know that people might tune their guitar up and then rehearse for a little while with, say, the rest of their band, and then they think, fine, great, sounds good, and they put it down, and then when they get back up to play, it sounds awful, and that's just because of you playing for a little while, and it will naturally go out of tune through use. Fourthly, the quality of the guitar and the quality of the strings will also define how long your guitar stays in tune. So generally speaking, a better guitar and higher quality strings will stay in tune for longer. And lastly, a tricky one which people don't often think about, but the temperature of your guitar and the temperature of the surroundings, and particularly changes in temperature, they will really take a guitar out of tune, because the strings are made of metal, so heat and all that kind of thing, or cold will make the strings expand or contract, and that will change the tension, which is what will affect the tuning of it. So a really common example, in summer for instance, you want to go somewhere and take your guitar with you. So you pop your guitar in the car, but the boot is probably really hot. So it heats up in the 20-30 minutes you're driving, and then you go back to your ride, wherever you're going to play guitar, and it might be air conditioned because it's summer, and the cold temperature will change your guitar tuning again. In fact, it might even, if it's really sudden, it might make some of your strings snap. So changes in temperature, they're a really big factor when you need to think about how often should I tune my guitar. Right, now how do you actually tune it? Well, the easy way, as I mentioned before, is you should use a tuner. So this is a vibration tuner. If you have one of those microphone tuners, which you just either plug into your guitar or sit in front of the sound hole, that's fine. But if you have a look at it, and the display is too small for you to see, but all it will tell you is what string you're playing, so long as your string is reasonably close to where it's meant to be. And it'll tell you whether your string is sounding too low. So if you want to sound a little more musical, you can say too flat, or if it's too high, in which case you need to make the sound a bit deeper. So as you play through, for instance, if I play the bottom E string now, my tuner tells me that sounds fine. Okay, so I'm going to go progress up the strings, and as it tells me, it'll as it hears the string, it feels the vibrations, it'll tell me whether I need to increase or decrease the pitch. So this A is a bit flat, so I'll just increase it a little bit here. When you're tuning, it's really important that you're really, really gentle with how you turn these heads. In fact, you hardly turn them at all, usually, unless your guitar is really, really out of tune. And even if it is really out of tune, you shouldn't turn them quickly, because that change in tension might actually make your guitar strings snap. So the D, that's pretty flat. So If you are one of the people lucky enough to have perfect pitch, then you're probably able to hear this and hear what's wrong without actually needing a tuner, but I'm not one of those people. So move up to the G, which is a bit high by the sounds of it. And the G, also high. You can hear the change in pitch. So I hardly turned the machine head at all, and there's quite a drastic change. So that's the way that they're designed. Be subtle when you change the strings. And this E is flat. That sounds pretty good. Okay, now once you've gone through and tuned all your strings, particularly if number one, your strings are brand new, or number two, you haven't tuned your guitar for a while, it's worth going back through all of the strings to make sure they sound okay. Because in the act of tuning some strings, the other strings may have gone back out of tune, and the tension of each string actually affects the others. Now once you've got all 6 strings tuned, you should play a chord to make sure it all sounds good together, because strings can sound individually fine, but together not. Okay, so that's how it works with a tuner. Now, it's important to know that even though a tuner is great, it's fast, it's accurate, you ought to be able to tune a guitar without a tuner, particularly if you want to play it in a band. Now, the main reason for that is that right now, my guitar is what's called absolutely tuned. So this E down the bottom is precisely E, well, according to my tuner. So if you've got perfect pitch, you should be able to recognize that, right? And the rest of the strings are precisely tuned to whatever the notes are meant to be. But if you're playing in a band, particularly if you're playing with a piano, which is very common, the piano itself may not be absolutely tuned. In fact, it's very unlikely, because tuning a piano takes a long time and it's very expensive. So it's no use if your guitar and your bass guitar or whatever other instruments you have are absolutely tuned and sound perfect on their own, and the piano that you're playing with, which is a major instrument which is going to define the entire band, is in a different tuning. So usually instead you'll want to tune your guitar rather than to a tuner. You'll want to tune it to whatever the piano is playing. Okay? So how do you do that? Now, I don't know how to play piano, but all you need to know to tune a guitar off a piano is more or less to play one note, and then to tune part of your guitar to that note, and then tune the rest of the guitar according to that. You can tune individual strings on your guitar to individual notes on the piano. That works too, but this skill is useful, and I'll show you how. So, most people start with the bottom E, this one, okay? So, you want to find where the E is on your piano. If you have a pianist friend, you can ask them to point it out to you. Or you can just go along and play the notes until you hear the one which sounds closest to your E. That's probably it, unless your guitar is drastically out of tune. Now, as you strike that note on your, if your piano has pedals, if it's not a keyboard, which would be nice, what you want to hold down is the rightmost pedal, because that will make the notes that you play on the piano stay, which will be helpful when we're trying to listen to the notes. So this is the E that I'm after. Okay, now you've got to practice your ability to listen to that. Turn it nice and loud if you can. And as you play it, you want to play your note alongside it, and then you can compare the two. So this is what I'm listening for. Now I want them to be as close as possible together. Now, just for instance, if I put this E out of tune, like so. So now, I'm not sure if you can tell the difference between that, but that's quite a lot more flat. Now, as I play it alongside, I mean, if I played it on its own, you might not know that it's wrong. But as I play it beside this E, you hopefully can feel that something's not quite right. So if you don't have that much experience and you're not sure, oh, should I go up or should I go down? You should play the note, and then you should try adjusting one way or the other, and you will feel it sound better or worse. So if, for instance, I played my E, and I wasn't sure whether I should go up or down, suppose I went down, you can feel it's going further away or closer. So that's how you know. So you want to bring it back up closer until happy with how they sound together. Okay. Now, like I said, this is the E, and you want to match it to the E that's on the piano. You could then go ahead and play the A that's on the piano, and then the D, and then the G, and then the B, and then the E, and go on like that. But alternatively, this is a useful skill anyway, now that you've got one string in tune, maybe a bit higher, now that you've got one string in tune, you can tune the other 5 strings according to this one string. So here's the way that it would work. On the E, right, if I play further up the fretboard, I can make the E string play a different note. So E turns into F, F sharp, G, G sharp, and on the 5th fret, which often will be marked on a little dot so it's easy to pick out, I should be making my E string play an A. It should be an A. Now therefore, I should be able to compare this A with the A that's meant to play on this string when I'm not holding down any frets. So I'm going to hear this kind of sound. So you want to compare those two together just like you were comparing the notes on the piano, okay? Now, once you get to a satisfactory point, you feel like they're about as close together as I can get them to be, you move on to the next string. And you use exactly the same trick. So this A string, if I move up the frets to the 5th fret again, it's now going to play a D. So you can see most of the strings on a guitar are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 semitones apart. There is an exception, but I'll show you in a second. So on the 2nd string, hold down the D, hold down the 5th string, and then play the next string along, and see if they sound about right. Do it again for the D. If you hold it down at the 5th fret, you'll play a G. Okay, now, once you get that satisfactory, moving up to the next string is a little bit different because this is the G. As you go up the notes, you go G, G sharp, A, B flat, and then on the 4th fret, not the 5th fret, it hits a B. So when you're trying to tune the B string, you don't want to hold the 5th fret on the previous string, you want to hold the 4th one. That's the only exception. The rest of them are fine. Even if you don't remember that and you play the 5th fret instead, you'll be like, okay, that's definitely not right. So then you go back a fret, and that sounds better. And then lastly, on the B, you want to go all the way up to the 5th fret again, and that's going to play an E, which you can compare to the top. Now, you can imagine, because you're going down the strings, or up the strings, depending on your perspective, if you have a little bit of error as you go from string to string, by the time you get to the highest E string, it's going to, if there is any error, it's going to compound. So that's why after you play the 6 strings, you should play a chord and make sure it sounds good together, because if it doesn't, go back and you should check it. Okay? Now, one of the ways to know which string is it which is causing you problems. Number one, more likely you have problems down, on these higher strings because there's more error compounded. But also, these middle strings, the D and the G, are often also culprits. So play a chord that you're familiar with. Go through each of the notes individually, like so. Because even though you might not be able to pick when you're going through like this, you may not be able to pick which one's which one's off. When you play the chord, because we play them so often, we have a really good sense of how they ought to sound, and you'll be able to pick out an off string much more easily. Okay? So that's how you tune a guitar. There are other ways to tune a guitar. For instance, if you, rather than holding down a fret, if you just put your finger lightly over the 12th fret of any of these strings, for instance here, and that's called playing a harmonic, you can use that to actually tune in a different way. So this is the way luthiers who build and design guitars, they tune a guitar. Rather than going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, they actually go in a different order, which I used to know, but I haven't really used the method all that much recently because I have a tutor and it does me fine. But you can look it up, you know, go at the 12th fret, which goes to the 12th fret harmonic, which goes to the 2nd fret on the D, because it's an E to an E, it's one octave up. And then you can tune it just the same way you're comparing the sounds. They say that way, the luthier's method is a bit more accurate, but it is trickier because you've got to know there's a whole order of strings that you need to have, and you have to hold down the string in order to tune it. But apparently it gets better results if you want to tune without a tuner. So, in summary, make sure you tune your guitar often. It'll make your playing sound so much better. And make sure you learn how to tune to an instrument so that when you're playing in a band, you're actually useful and you add to the sound of the band rather than taking away from it.